The year was 1944. The world was a battlefield, consumed by relentless conflict, where every day brought whispers of fear and uncertainty. In a quiet corner of a war-torn Europe, a convoy of captured nurses trudged through mud-soaked roads, their uniforms torn, hands trembling from exhaustion, and hearts heavy with dread. They had heard the rumors, tales of prisoner camps where rations were scarce, blankets were threadbare, and the nights were long and merciless. Starvation and suffering were expected to be their companions, and yet, somewhere deep within, a fragile spark of hope refused to die. The sun dipped low on the horizon, casting a golden, sorrowful light over the camp as the nurses were herded into a fenced compound. The air was thick with tension, punctuated by the distant clatter of military boots. Each step felt heavier than the last, as they prepared themselves for the unimaginable. Empty bowls, hunger, and despair. But what awaited them was unlike anything their wary minds had anticipated. Behind the gates stood neatly arranged barracks, the smell of freshly baked bread drifting through the air, and the soft murmur of kindness in the voices of their captors. It was a surreal tableau, a striking contrast to the fearsome stories that had haunted them on the journey. In that moment, the nurses froze, disbelief etched across their faces. Could this really be real? The nurses stepped cautiously into the dining hall, their boots sinking slightly into the worn wooden floor. The space stretched before them like a dream they hadn't dared to imagine, a room filled with long, polished tables that gleamed under the soft light filtering through high windows. Each table was meticulously arranged, the plates stacked neatly, silverware shining with careful precision. At the center of each setting was a plate, already brimming with food that seemed impossibly fresh, colorful, and plentiful. For a moment, the nurses froze, their eyes wide with disbelief, their minds still steeped in the grim expectations of hunger and neglect. Could scarcely reconcile this sight with the images they had carried in their memories for weeks. The cracked earth of the roads, the skeletal figures of prisoners they had glimpsed from afar, the empty bowls, and the hollow faces that mirrored their own fears. Steam rose from bowls of thick, nourishing soup carrying aromas that awakened long-buried memories of home. The scent of freshly baked bread, warm and fragrant, drifted through the air like a soft promise, mingling with the aroma of roasted meats and cooked vegetables that seemed impossibly colorful for a world at war. Their stomachs, which had grown accustomed to gnawing emptiness, responded before their minds could, sending pangs of hunger that were almost painful in their intensity. Hands trembled as they hovered over the plates, unsure whether it was appropriate to reach for the food, whether this generosity could be real, whether they were worthy of such kindness. The juxtaposition of expectation and reality was so jarring that some nurses glanced at each other, searching for confirmation that what they saw truly existed, that it was not some cruel trick of the mind, some mirage conjured by desperate longing. The soldiers overseeing the hall were uniformed, yes, but their demeanor was calm, professional, and unexpectedly kind. They moved quietly between tables offering refills, gently ensuring that each nurse received a fair portion. There was no barking of orders, no cold indifference, no cruel amusement at the presence of captives. Instead, there was attentiveness, patience, a quiet insistence that these women, once strangers, now prisoners, were entitled to the same care afforded to anyone in need. Each plate set before them carried more than food. It carried a message, a quiet but unmistakable reassurance. Even amid the chaos of war, there existed pockets of humanity, gestures that defied the brutality surrounding them. The nurses finally began to sit, their movements slow, tentative, as if stepping into a fragile dream. With each bite, the reality of the meal began to settle in, washing over them in a tide of relief and disbelief. The warmth of the soup seemed to seep not only into their bodies, but into the very marrow of their spirits, melting away layers of fear and tension that had accumulated over endless nights and weary marches. Chewing on bread that was soft yet substantial, tasting vegetables that carried the vibrant freshness of fields they hadn't seen in months, the nurses felt a profound sense of restoration. It was a simple act, yet in this war-ravaged world, it felt revolutionary nourishment, not just of the body, but of the soul. They began to talk quietly among themselves, their voices hesitant at first, as though speaking might shatter the fragile magic of the moment. One nurse whispered about her childhood kitchen, where bread had been baked with care, and another murmured about the smell of roasting potatoes that reminded her of home. Memories, long suppressed by fatigue and fear, began to stir within them, carried by the tastes and smells that surrounded them. Some laughed softly at the absurdity of finding such comfort here, in the very place they had expected misery, while others simply closed their eyes for a moment, letting tears slip freely at the overwhelming contrast between expectation and reality. The hall itself seemed to amplify the surreal nature of the scene. Light streamed in through tall windows, falling in golden shafts that danced across the polished floor and the faces of the women. The tables were arranged with geometric precision, yet the effect was not cold or sterile. It was inviting, almost ceremonious. Each chair was positioned just so, allowing easy access to the bountiful dishes. The space resonated with quiet murmurs, clinking silverware, and the gentle shuffling of feet, sounds that were comforting rather than alarming. In the midst of war, this hall was an oasis, a place where the physical needs of the body were met with extraordinary care, and where the mind could, for fleeting moments, drift away from fear and into normalcy. Some nurses lingered over their meals, taking smaller bites to savor each flavor, as though tasting it fully might anchor them in the present, might reassure them that this was not an illusion. Others helped those less accustomed to abundance, guiding hands offering encouragement to eat, to take more, to accept this unprecedented kindness. Bonds began to form, not of convenience, but of shared amazement and the recognition that, in this moment, they were witnesses to a rare intersection of mercy and humanity. Even the soldiers' faces reflected this strange harmony. There was satisfaction in their attentiveness, pride in maintaining a semblance of dignity in a world that had seen so much destruction. As the meal progressed, the nurse's initial disbelief gave way to gratitude, the simplicity of nourishment. A warm plate of food, a cup of tea, a fresh slice of bread felt monumental, as though the war's relentless darkness had been temporarily pierced by a single, steady beam of light. They ate slowly, deliberately, and in the process reclaimed a fragment of themselves that had been dulled by hunger, exhaustion, and fear. Conversations grew more confident, smiles emerged more easily, and laughter, quiet but genuine, began to echo through the hall. In the act of eating, they had not only fed their bodies, but had also reclaimed dignity, humanity, and hope. Outside, the camp continued its rhythmic patterns of routine and order, but inside that dining hall, time seemed to slow. Each plate cleared, each sip of broth savored, each smile shared became a small victory over the harshness of war. The nurses were no longer merely captives. They were participants in a scene of grace that defied the expectations of suffering. Here, even within the confines of captivity, they found proof that compassion could exist where brutality was anticipated, that the simplest gestures, food served with care, attention paid to comfort, could become profound acts. After the extraordinary meal, the nurses were guided through the barracks to discover a world that seemed almost unreal for prisoners of war. Their boots clicked against the polished wooden floors, echoing softly through the corridors that were remarkably clean, almost immaculate, as if every surface had been carefully tended to that very morning. The air carried a faint, comforting scent of fresh linens and mild soap, a stark contrast to the damp, heavy odors they had grown accustomed to during their long, grueling journey. Each step deeper into the barracks revealed an unexpected attention to detail: rows of neatly made beds, blankets folded with precision, pillows plumped and aligned, sheets smoothed so carefully that it almost seemed ceremonial. It was not merely cleanliness. They were witnessing care, deliberate and tender care, extended to those whom the world might have assumed to be unworthy. Some nurses reached out tentatively to touch the blankets, their fingers brushing the fabric as though confirming it was real, solid, tangible. For months they had slept on straw, on cold floors, or on makeshift bedding that offered little comfort. Here, in this unexpected sanctuary, each bed became a small fortress of warmth and security, a place where the body could finally surrender to rest without fear of neglect or injury. The texture of the blankets, soft yet substantial, seemed almost to whisper promises of safety. A few women paused, letting their hands linger on the smooth linen, closing their eyes for a brief moment of private gratitude, imagining their own homes far away, yet realizing that this modest comfort was, for now, enough to soothe the raw edges of their exhaustion. Beyond the beds, the barracks revealed other thoughtful touches that hinted at an understanding of human dignity rarely extended to captives. Small tables held simple but significant items: a vase with freshly picked wildflowers, carefully arranged to add color and life to the stark wooden rooms, a small note on each table welcoming the women and wishing them a good rest, neatly stacked towels and soap within easy reach, placed deliberately for use. The nurses exchanged glances, faces a mixture of astonishment and deep, quiet relief. Such gestures, they realized, spoke volumes about the captor's intent. Their acknowledgement that these women, though prisoners, deserved care and the restoration of some semblance of normalcy. Bathing facilities were modest but pristine, each corner spotless, with warm water readily available, a luxury they had scarcely imagined in the past months. The nurses stepped in hesitantly, some hesitant to take more than a quick rinse, almost embarrassed by the sheer abundance of what had been provided. Others moved with cautious enthusiasm, letting the warm water cascade over tense shoulders, feeling the grime of travel, stress, and fear wash away. In those moments, laughter occasionally bubbled up, soft, fragile sounds of relief and shared wonder that had seemed impossible only days before. The simple acts of cleanliness, of being able to care for their own bodies with dignity, were transformative. The nurses understood, perhaps for the first time since capture, that comfort could exist even in captivity, that human consideration could transcend the horrors of war. As they settled into the barracks, quiet conversations emerged. One nurse spoke of her mother's careful folding of linens. Another described the scent of soap from her childhood home, while a third marveled at the soft blankets, recalling a memory of winter nights spent under warm covers long ago. The stories intertwined, weaving a tapestry of nostalgia, connection, and fragile hope. Each nurse found herself not only physically rested but emotionally restored. The simple human comforts, clean sheets, a warm bed, access to bathing, and thoughtful details acted as anchors, grounding them in a reality that had seemed lost to endless fear and deprivation. Even the soldiers who oversaw the barracks contributed to the sense of quiet dignity. They moved with efficiency but without harshness, offering assistance where necessary and observing respect. The barracks themselves seemed almost alive with quiet kindness. Light streamed through the windows during the day, illuminating the rooms in a gentle glow that highlighted the neatness of the beds and the vibrancy of the flowers on each table. Shadows played across the walls, softening the harsh edges of the wooden structures and creating a sense of warmth and calm. In the evening, lamps with soft yellow light provided a glow that invited rest rather than anxiety, casting a gentle hue over faces that had grown accustomed to the pallor of fear and exhaustion. For the nurses, the environment itself became a source of comfort, a tangible reminder that the world could still contain pockets of care and serenity, even amid conflict. Gradually, routines began to form. The nurses learned to anticipate the schedules, to participate in simple domestic tasks like arranging linens or tidying their small spaces, and to take pleasure in small acts of order. This structure, though modest, provided stability, a counterpoint to the chaos of war outside the camp walls. The repetition of small, manageable actions brought a sense of control and self-respect, reinforcing the surprising idea that captivity did not necessarily mean the absence of agency. Each folded blanket, each washed towel, each carefully placed item became a quiet act of reclaiming dignity. The impact of these comforts went beyond the physical. The nurses felt a slow, almost imperceptible healing of the spirit. The mental strain of war, constant vigilance, fear of starvation, uncertainty about the future, began to ebb in the presence of deliberate care and attention. Sleep, once restless and haunted by nightmares, became deeper and more restorative. Emotions, long held in check, found release in quiet conversations, shared laughter, and even the simple act of preparing a bed or arranging a table. Every detail, from the soft linens to the clean water, seemed designed not just to meet practical needs but to nurture the soul, reminding the women that they were still valued, still seen, still capable of experiencing moments of peace. As days passed, the nurses' confidence in the care provided solidified. What had once seemed improbable, comfort within captivity, became the new reality. They learned the rhythms of the barracks, the ways in which the soldiers and camp staff supported them, and the small acts of kindness that were woven into every aspect of life. These moments of comfort were not merely incidental, they were carefully sustained, deliberate gestures that reinforced the message that humanity could exist even in the shadow of war. Each nurse internalized the profound lesson: dignity, respect, and care could survive even in the harshest circumstances. By the time the first week had passed, the barracks had transformed from a space of cautious curiosity into a place of quiet sanctuary. The nurses moved through the rooms with a new awareness, a recognition of the delicate balance between expectation and reality, fear and comfort. Each day reinforced the surprising generosity of the environment. Each small gesture deepened the impact of the care they received. It was a revelation that reshaped their perception of captivity, showing them that even amid the backdrop of global conflict, human compassion could prevail. offering nourishment not only to the body, but to the heart and spirit alike. As the days in the camp progressed, the nurses began to notice a rhythm in the way kindness manifested around them, subtle but persistent, and in ways that were almost impossible to ignore. Each interaction with the soldiers was imbued with a quiet respect, a gentle attentiveness that contrasted sharply with the harshness they had expected. Orders were spoken with clarity, never harshness. Guidance was given patiently, never brusquely. The nurses began to realize that the captor's behavior was intentional, a conscious effort to create a sense of stability and comfort amid the uncertainty of captivity. It was not merely a functional arrangement to keep prisoners in line. It was a display of humanity, a recognition that even in the most extreme circumstances, empathy could persist. The nurses found themselves on a spectrum of emotions that shifted from cautious suspicion to genuine appreciation. Initially, they had been skeptical, wary of any gesture that seemed too generous to be real. Each offer of assistance, each soft spoken word, each small act of consideration was met with tentative acceptance. Over time, however, this skepticism gave way to gratitude, and gratitude began to evolve into trust. They began to share more freely, not just with each other, but with the soldiers who served them. A request for extra blankets, a question about a scheduled bath, even a simple inquiry about the meal. These interactions became opportunities to witness a form of care that defied all prior expectations. For women who had anticipated neglect and suffering, the experience was transformative, a revelation that human decency could survive even in the harshest of conditions. Laughter began to echo through the hallways and barracks, soft at first, hesitant, almost afraid to exist in a place once imagined as a prison of fear. A shared joke between nurses, a playful comment about the abundance of fresh bread, a light-hearted observation of the meticulous arrangements of the camp, all became threads weaving a tapestry of normalcy amid abnormal circumstances. The nurses realized that this laughter, fragile and delicate, was more than a simple release of tension. It was a symbol of their resilience, a declaration that even in captivity, life and joy could persist. It was as though the camp itself, with its careful order, its thoughtful gestures, and the unexpected warmth of its inhabitants, had become a silent partner in preserving their humanity. Every day brought new moments that reinforced this sense of unexpected comfort. Soldiers would offer guidance with patient gestures when the nurses learned to navigate their routines, showing them where to wash, how to fold linens efficiently, or where to line up for meals. These interactions were small but laden with significance. They signaled a willingness to treat the nurses as people rather than mere captives, a subtle but powerful acknowledgement that their well-being mattered. The nurses, in turn, responded with cautious openness, sometimes a quiet smile, sometimes a nod of gratitude, slowly bridging the gap that fear and suspicion had once imposed. These exchanges were silent victories, microcosms of humanity asserting itself over the anticipated cruelty of war. The nurses began to notice the little details that brought an extraordinary sense of dignity to their daily lives. The camp was organized with precision, yet every detail seemed designed with care for its occupants. Beds were never neglected. Even the smallest tasks were completed thoughtfully, from folding towels to arranging chairs. The lighting was warm and intentional, casting gentle glows across the floors and illuminating faces with softness rather than harsh shadows. They could see the sunlight streaming through high windows, highlighting the neat rows of furniture, The vibrant flowers, the freshly polished surfaces, all elements that seemed almost ceremonial in their simplicity. In this care, even the most skeptical among them could not deny the profound effect of these gestures on morale. Simple daily routines, washing, arranging bedding, preparing for meals, became exercises in comfort and dignity. Each completed task reinforced the notion that they were not forgotten, that they were seen and acknowledged, that their well-being mattered. This realization carried a subtle but powerful emotional weight. Whereas fear had once defined their every thought and action, the nurses now began to navigate their days with quiet confidence, their spirits buoyed by consistent, small-scale demonstrations of care. For women who had anticipated neglect, this was nothing short of miraculous, a reshaping of expectation and perception that would leave a lasting imprint. As the weeks continued, the camp's influence on the nurses' emotional landscape deepened. The initial shock of generosity gave way to a profound appreciation for the intentionality behind it. They noticed how even minor details, the way the soldiers moved through the hallways, the careful arrangement of each room, the predictable schedules, created a sense of stability that had been absent in their previous experiences. This order, combined with consistent acts of kindness, began to replace fear with trust, suspicion with openness, and resignation with hope. The nurses began to understand that even within the framework of captivity, where the world might seem to have stripped them of control and agency, they could still experience dignity, comfort, and compassion. These lessons extended beyond mere physical comfort. The nurses observed the way soldiers treated one another, the way care and patience flowed through the routines of the camp. They witnessed empathy as a tangible, deliberate force shaping interactions and preserving the humanity of everyone involved. The nurses began to internalize these lessons, seeing themselves not just as captives but as participants in a delicate network of care that could exist even amid conflict. In time, they began to replicate this attention and kindness in their own behaviors, supporting one another, offering assistance where it was needed, sharing stories, and nurturing each other's spirits. Through these acts, the camp's influence rippled outward, transforming fear into community and isolation into shared humanity. By the end of their time in the barracks, the nurses were no longer defined by the expectation of suffering. They had experienced, in vivid and undeniable ways, the reality that captivity could coexist with compassion, that comfort could be extended even within rigid boundaries of control. They had witnessed the extraordinary power of consistent, thoughtful care, how small, deliberate acts could nurture the spirit as effectively as they nourished the body. The lessons were enduring. The presence of humanity, empathy, and dignity could defy expectation, create hope, and foster resilience even in the darkest of times. In these moments, quiet yet profound, the nurses found themselves transformed. They had come expecting despair and neglect, and instead had encountered warmth, nourishment, and attentive care. Each smile shared, each soft word spoken, each gentle gesture of guidance or assistance became a symbol of survival, not merely of body, but of spirit. And as they moved through the barracks, exchanging glances, helping each other with small tasks, and resting in beds that were soft and inviting, they realized that the impact of this unexpected kindness would echo in their hearts long after the war had ended. For these women, the camp had become more than a temporary refuge. It had become a living testament to the enduring power of human compassion, a cinematic contrast to the brutality they had anticipated.